Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the veiling power of the mortal mind and the 12 obstructions obscuring the truth. Listen as we explain the difference between mortal sense and spiritual truth. In this show, we will discuss in more detail why the resurrection of Lazarus only appears in the 11th chapter of the books of John. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and step out of time into eternity. Swami, I see the title of today's show is Now is Always to Spirit. What can you tell us about that title?
Well, I think what we're trying to do here in this show is create a better understanding of the difference between the finite and the infinite, between the mortal and the immortal, the difference between the mental material concept of life and spirit, the truth of being. The way Mary Baker Eddy made this distinction quite clear was she used the term to think with God as God. And she wrote about this in a paper called Body. There are plenty of people today saying to be here now. However, Mary Baker Eddy was healing the sick, raising the dead, giving advice, teaching classes, and selling books. On the other hand, today's teachers seem to give advice, teach classes, and sell books. It's the same thing, or is it? For me, there's a huge gap, the difference between Jesus and the Pharisees. And the major difference is the Pharisee is under karmic law, but thinks they're spiritual. And Jesus is under divine law, which is triumphing over material law. So this idea now is always to spirit. To think with God as God. God thinks in terms of the absolute. In the divine creation, there's no time. Time is measured in now and then. In spirit, there's no space. Space is measured here and there. And for spirit, everywhere is here. So making this adjustment, Mary Baker Eddy called this educating thought up to spiritual apprehension. That initially we're working with this finite mortal mind, which is individualized from the world mind. We're working in duality, contrast. And the Bible calls this being double-minded. And we're perceiving that which God did not create. And we have to do something in order that we think differently. We repent. And so trying to understand the difference between working with the mind that can't bring forth the divine image and can't come out of its own creation, and then somehow trying to figure out what it's going to look like when I accept spiritual identity, when I am one with the divine creative principle. And so just like what we were saying, Mary Baker Eddy put healing on the table. she pretty much tells us that if you cannot heal the sick, reform sinner, raise the dead, which is the ministry of the Christ, you do not understand yourself spiritually. That's a wonderful litmus test. This is a way of proving what I'm doing is working, which is exactly what religion took off the table. They were happy with belief, to believe in something and wait and see if the promises of religion were fulfilled in this so-called afterlife. But what makes Christian science a science is they have a rule and an outcome. And so now, if you want to understand yourself spiritually, this gives us a way of doing it. But you have to understand that there's going to be a huge difference between thinking with your 5 material senses and knowing with your 7 spiritual senses.
Well, you had said we have to do something differently. So what do you recommend that we have to do?
Well, what we do in Kriya Yoga is we employ strategies. Now, Jesus gives you the fast track in the Bible where he says, take no thought for thine own self. But initially, to be able to stop thinking, you're going to find isn't going to be all that easy. And to separate your identity from being individualized from the world mind, to free your thought from the influence of your 5 material senses, is going to require a certain amount of willpower, and it's also going to require some education. That's one of the reasons why we keep coming back to this resurrection of Lazarus as the 11th chapter on the book of John. Because first of all, it's the 11th chapter. There are 10 chapters leading up to the 11th chapter, and then finally brings you to Jerusalem, where Jesus marches into Jerusalem on the back of the donkey, which is all a metaphor. It's all symbolic language for this process in development. So what the Bible is trying to tell us is there's going to be preparatory work. You don't just wake up one day and declare that I'm spiritual, and now you are demonstrating divine law with scientific certainty. So we know there's preparatory work. We know that there are things that we can and we must do in order to experience this divine truth, which is right here. It's always everywhere, and it's functioning. But we must be conscious of it. And thinking about it is not the same as being conscious of it.
I see that we have a soundbite from Herb Fitch from the Realization of Oneness. I think we should play that now.
Yeah, this is from class 3A. And if anybody's interested in the full audio file or the complete program, you can get this at mysticalprinciples.com, and I'll play it.
That are in your neighbor's consciousness. They have a completely new Pacific Ocean in their consciousness, a completely new sun and stars and planets. Their consciousness contains their world. They may think that their world and yours are the same, but if you have practiced your exercise well, you will discover that as many people as walk this earth, that's how many Pacific Oceans there are. That's how many suns there are. That's how many different worlds there are. Each consciousness contains another world. Now you're concerned at the moment with your world, within your consciousness. And if you have dominion over your consciousness, you will have dominion over your world. Nothing can get outside of your consciousness. There's no place for it to go. And so the automobile coming down the street isn't, it's in your consciousness. The child born isn't, it's in your consciousness. The qualities of your life in this world, in your consciousness, are determining the outward appearances. Everyone you know who seems external to you is in your consciousness. And when you talk to them, you are speaking to someone in your consciousness. This is an exercise that must be practiced to be experienced. And then another exercise which may make the first two clearer to you, is to see this, that your consciousness is cosmic in size. It isn't a consciousness just as big as your body. It's cosmic in size. And way down in the middle of it is a little image called your form. A little 5-foot image in the center of a vast, vast, vast consciousness. All that consciousness is in quality becomes the visible image called body. And the rest of the consciousness becomes the world. That's how your little body appears in this consciousness. And that's how your population of your world walks and talks in this consciousness. And when you go up to the source of this consciousness, you find the two life streams that are feeding it, the divine and the world, both feeding this consciousness that you call me down in this little image called body. And the quality of that consciousness is being determined by what percent of the world mind is feeding you and what percent of the divine. As you learn to turn more to the divine, that changes the little image in the middle of the consciousness, and it changes the world around that image. And vice versa, as you have less of the divine, you find that the little image shows some discord, some lack, some limitation, because always the image that you have called body is made of the fabric of that cosmic consciousness which you are living in. And so now we turn away from the image. We turn away from the world, because the image and the world are all within your consciousness, and we become more concerned about the quality of my consciousness. For this in turn determines the quality of my body image, and it determines the quality of my business, the quality of my life, the quality of my world. Everything in my consciousness becomes the fabric of everything in my world.
Swami, I really like his explanation of consciousness, and I get a really good visual from that as well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I actually like what he says too, because I start out with the visual of the image we use for the logo, and the primary reason why I use that diagram to substantiate this idea of total consciousness, where you see yourself not only as a separate entity, but at the same time as universal. In Kriya Yoga, we call that resurrected consciousness, this merging of the microcosmic orbit, your chakra system, with the macrocosmic orbit.
And I like when he was talking about the two streams that are coming into the consciousness. We have the divine stream and we have like the world stream. It really kind of does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I really think that comes from Genesis 1, where you have the upper stream of water and you have the lower stream of water. When the outer world of sense and the inner world of spirit become one, when divine truth is the only consciousness, this idea of proving the presence of the divine principle. Truth dispels error, just like light dispels darkness. Darkness is not an opposing power to truth. It's the absence of truth. And a lot of the symbolism in the Bible is really helpful in understanding that. One of my very favorites is 1 John 3. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. End of quote. All of this is coming back to this difference between thinking with your 5 material senses and knowing with your 7 spiritual senses.
So after listening to that Herb Fitch lecture and then looking at the image that you use for the logo, I can really see the visual and why it would be important to understand the zodiac in its relationship to why we need that in our spiritual development.
Yeah, like Mary Baker Eddy said, a proper sense of the infinite. And one of the major reasons why I started using this is because when you put the fixed signs on the angles, which is astrological language for taking Scorpio, Aquarius, Taurus, and Leo on the cusp of the first house, the fourth house, the seventh, and the 10th house. The zodiac lines up where the planets that are associated with the chakras, the 7 personal planets associated with the 7 chakras, are in alignment with the signs that they rule. Then you can assign each of the obstructions to one of the signs of the zodiac. And it works out really well because in the diagram we also represent what's called Ida, Pingala, and Shushumna in yoga, which is descending prana, ascending prana, and the middle road. Things represented in scripture like the dragon and 2 beasts, or Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. This is all imagery and a way of starting to understand ourselves in the way that we are created.
We're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. Listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Asana class is a module fitting into the master plan, leading the practitioner to the experience of total consciousness by attuning the mind-body complex to the divine idea. A system of exercises designed to use the physical appearance to determine individual level of consciousness and degree of awareness, starting with the process of lengthening and strengthening muscles to bring bones into the position of internal support. We educate thought up to spiritual apprehension, because when spirit is cause, it calls into expression the beauty of holiness, making creation perfect. Mountain pose may not bring you truth in consciousness, but truth in consciousness must bring mountain pose. Visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those who are just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I'd like to talk more about the symbolism of what we were just talking about before the break. And I understand that this symbolism can be found in many other places. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, you're talking about the logo that we use. The symbolism of the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle appears on the planet in various forms, like the Sphinx in Egypt is the head of the man, the body of the bull, the paws of the lion, the wings of the phoenix, which was the original symbol for Scorpio. The 4 evangelists in Christianity are symbolized by the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle. Also in Revelations in the Bible, it makes direct reference to the man, the bull, the lion, and the eagle. When I first discovered this information was substantiated by all of these different forms, I really started to work with the image. And it has proved to be a very helpful tool in being able to keep information together, because it's very information intensive. And if you have a hub, if you have a way of keeping your information organized, it helps you keep it in the foreground of your thought at all times.
Well, speaking of more information, I'd like to talk more about the obstructions and what can we learn about that and what do we do with it?
In order to really get the benefit of divine science, you must start with the principle. Spirit is all. All is absolute goodness. All the good, beautiful, and true attributes belong to the divine principle. Now, what is appearing in your material senses can never be the divine image and likeness. The mortal mind works on contrast, a divided consciousness, a finite perspective of an infinite principle. But you can use the testimony of your material senses to give you clues as to what you are conscious of. By labeling or outlining the obstructions. Like we started out saying, time is an obstruction. In the format we use, we work with the 7 personal planets. And if you start with Saturn at the root center, which is Muladhara Chakra in yoga, we have assigned a church to it and also a Mary Baker Eddy word. The church is Ephesus and Mary Baker Eddy word is principle. Saturn in astrology is the father of time. And so the barrier is time. Saturn rules Capricorn and Aquarius in astrology. Capricorn is the then of time, and Aquarius is the now of time. The next octave of that is to know the redeeming qualities that would dissolve the illusion of these veiling powers of the mortal mind, these obstructions. Capricorn is represented by the redeeming quality of obedience. Aquarius is the redeeming quality of friendliness. And then as you go up, you go to the next chakra, which is symbolized by Jupiter. Svadhisthana chakra, the church is Smyrna, and the Mary Baker Eddy word associated with that is soul. Jupiter, which is considered the expansion principle of the universe, would be associated with space. Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces in astrology. Sagittarius is represented by the there of space, and Pisces is the here of space. And these are the obstructions. Now, of course, we need the polar opposite, which would be the dissolving attribute. Sagittarius has the attribute of reverence, and Pisces has the attribute of kindness. Reverence dissolves the illusion of the there of space, and kindness dissolves the illusion of the here of space. And so you're starting to see you have an organized system. You have a way of examining yourself in the way that you're created. And as you go up to each chakra, you notice that your lowest 6 energy centers have 3 terminals. And the crown center only has 1 avenue that leads to it. So as we rise out of duality into this unified state, in divine science, the inner sanctuary is found in consciousness, which means it must be everywhere always, or there is no divine principle in consciousness. Spirit can't be divided, but thought can be freed from the influence of mortal mind. This process of removing the obstructions which veil the divine truth from consciousness, this is called the unfolding. This unfolding is the repentance, or turning from living through the 5 material senses to living through the 7 spiritual senses or centers. We begin to acknowledge the divine self as the only self, one perfect, eternal, changeless life. Then we educate the mortal mind up to spiritual apprehension. And here, in Kriya Yoga, we attune the mind-body complex to the divine idea with exercises like salutation to the moon, salutation to the sun. We use tools like the Cretan labyrinth or the 7-circuit labyrinth, all programmed with information to invite divine mind into consciousness and lift identity out from personal sense into your divine self.
Swami, in the opening, we were going to discuss the differences between mortal sense and spiritual truth. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think one of the first things that you start to understand about being spirit is that spirit has no needs. Spirit is perfect, is whole, it's complete, fulfilled. When we are in mortal sense, we have needs. In fact, I have something here from Mary Baker Eddy, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 223-3. I'll read it. Sooner or later, we shall learn that the fetters of man's finite capacity are forged by the illusion that he lives in body instead of in soul, in matter instead of in spirit. End of quote. Until we can rise into our infinite spiritual body, into our divine self, and come out of the belief that we are a finite mortal being. Now, this isn't something that happens in a weekend intensive. This is a process that unfolds where you're now becoming one with the divine creative principle. And as this spiritual light is illuminating your thought, you're coming out of the darkness of the belief in matter. And we can't do this without the Christ, without the saving aspect of truth coming to our consciousness. This is why in the resurrection of Lazarus, Lazarus is in the tomb before Christ can come to him. And Lazarus can't come out of the tomb until Christ calls him out. This is important symbolism for us to understand that we must master this finite mortal sense of self. Lazarus represents the purified human consciousness awaiting the revelation of the Christ. And so if we're not following the instruction, then we're shooting from the hip. And that's a big part of why we keep coming back to the strategies employed in Kriya Yoga.
So we have another quote here by Mary Baker Eddy, also from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. This is from page 284, lines 4 to 8. I'll read it. If God were limited to man or matter, or if the infinite could be circumscribed within the finite, God would be corporeal. An unlimited mind, that's with the capital M, would seem to spring from a limited body, but this is an impossibility. End of quote. So it kind of answers that question to me we were talking about earlier about the difference between mortal sense and spiritual truth.
Right. And so important to understand that you cannot put an immortal mind in a finite body. And one of the reasons why we must know ourselves spiritually, we must accept spiritual identity. And then we should have a clear understanding of what that's going to look like when you're doing it. Because when you're doing it, you must be out of time and out of space. I am everywhere, always. And if you're still in the now, chances are you're not working with the mind that brings forth the divine image, and therefore you won't be demonstrating the divine law with any kind of scientific certainty.
Well, it is that time to end our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On any of the pages, you can scroll down. You'll see there are several buttons that you can press to further your spiritual development, as well as the Swami Says recent posts. Swami, any other further thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance, get the light in your soul, and step out of time into eternity. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.